We've still got a long way to go to this project, so I haven't actually got to the point where we started doing day in the life videos. And I'll show you what I have for breakfast, lunch and dinner. I'm having Cocoa Pops. Hello, my name is Matt Jazz and I've tasked myself to make a visual novel by myself. Today is devlog number 10, so without further ado, let me show you what I've been working on. So, in the last video we basically named the game and created the logo. And in this episode we're going to be creating the main menu. So the first thing to do is gather reference for it. And I referenced a bunch of different games from a bunch of different genres to get what I wanted. Not just visual novels, but also different types of games as well, to give me a general idea of what a main menu should look like. And then after all the reference was gathered, I basically took my sketchbook and started sketching out different layouts for what the main menu could be. Now at this point I was using the current background I have for this. Go check out the previous devlog if you want to see the creation of that. And I basically started sketching out ideas and different layouts for what the main menu could be. Kind of ranging from the simple with little cutouts. This kind of always reminded me of GTA 3, you know, the intro with all the different slides. So literally just the logo and the buttons themselves. And then whilst browsing online, I found this image here. This was kind of like a ramen sign that I was using for like previous reference searching and all that kind of stuff. And it kind of gave me the idea of just having an outside perspective of the noodle nook itself, rather than using the same background throughout the entire game. And then started sketching a few new main menu designs, ranging from outside the noodle nook to outside the alleyway itself. So you don't actually see the noodle nook until the game actually starts. And then I had one that was just kind of like the outside version of just the sign itself, taking up most of the screen. But the sign was kind of the main focal point, and as I started adding more and more details, I then found this piece of artwork on ArtStation. This is by Ethan Yant. Now this was a 3D creation, and it was kind of the thing that I was going for, a back alley ramen stall. And using this as inspiration and using other few things that I found online, I started creating different versions of like an outside look of the alleyway. I then settled upon this sketch here. And the original idea was to have the menu buttons themselves be kind of like cast as shadows on the floor, which I thought was a nice idea. I had things like a vending machine, trash cans, signs, air ducts and vents, that kind of thing. And rather than use kind of my eyes to make the perspective of this work, like I did with the previous background, I thought why not actually make this in 3D? This would mean if I wanted other perspectives and other camera shots of the alleyway and the noodle nook itself, I could then get this using this and then it wouldn't change the perspective, the scales of everything would be fine. And believe it or not, I actually realized I actually know a 3D program, and it took me back nearly 15 years ago, which makes me feel old at this point, and I used a program called SketchUp, or at the time when I was using it, it was called Google SketchUp. This is a bare bones and very easy to use 3D building tool, and it can also work in browser, which is amazing. So I loaded it back up in browser, and believe it or not, all the skills that I'd learned from like 15 years ago when I was a kid actually came flooding back, and I kind of knew how to use this very, very quickly. You draw and extrude. It's kind of like the bare bones of like how to build in this tool, but it was the easiest way that I could come up with. And using other references of other streets and alleyways and all that kind of stuff, I eventually made something that looked like this. And it could be basically broken down in 3 parts. The back road, the left building, and the right building. All 3 basically come together to create the alleyway itself, and then you can actually line the camera up to have it whichever way you want. Now one thing that I found that was really cool is you could actually change the time of day on this. This becomes much more useful later when it comes to making the shadows and all that kind of stuff. But you can change the time of day that can cast shadows and stuff like that, so it also creates the perspective lines for the shadows, which I thought was very, very cool. So we have to start drawing over this. And for this I used Clip Studio Paint, my trusty drawing program of choice, and I basically brought it in, had it in 4K, which is the resolution I'm using, and I started doing all the outlining. Now the outlining, I'm using the bog standard default pen tool. It seems to be the nicest, smoothest way for me to get clean lines, which is kind of my style. I chose an outline color, which was using the same outline color as the characters that I had previously. Go check out that devlog as well. And basically started drawing over the whole thing. Now at this point I could change various things like textures on the trash cans, making curves. Example, at the top we see the drain pipe coming down the building. I actually made that as a big curve rather than just blocks. And this is where I started adding some of the detail for it. And after all the outlines was done, it looked something like this. Now the next step is color. Now color I do kind of struggle with, so at this point I actually started essentially covering the whole canvas in color, not just focusing on the buildings but also the city in the background. The story in question that I'm going to be using for this game takes place away from the major city itself. So I wanted to be able to see that, so I created some buildings and a night sky, and then basically working back forward, almost like a Bob Ross painting. So I started with a back alley, adding all the colours. There was a lot of oranges, greys and browns that I was using for this. This will probably change further down the line, but I kind of liked how it turned out. And after all the colours were laid down flat, it looked something like this. Now this is where the background starts coming together from this point onwards, and I started adding shading and highlights. The shading I kind of used like a dark purple, and I put it on a multiply level, and pretty much the left hand side of everything I was adding shadows to. I was also adding the shadows that was created from the 3D model as well. This helped massively. This is the reason why I thought that using that 3D model from earlier was a massive step up from what I was doing before with the background, which was basically photo bashing everything together and kind of eyeballing most of the perspective. And I also realized now that I've got this 3D model, I am probably going to have to redo that old background. That's not a bad thing. This is basically making this whole thing look consistent. So with the shading complete and also the highlights, which was done with an overlay level using a bright yellow, there wasn't much highlights on this. It ended up something that looked like this. Now I could just leave it there and just be like, yep, this is done, shading, highlights, and so on and so forth. However, I want to make sure that this alleyway looks like it's been lived in. It has like a world that it's connected to. So in my sketchbook, I basically started creating graffiti and different types of things that could be like placed around the place, things like stickers, throw-ups, tags, that kind of thing. Kind of taking a leaf out of Ian Hubert's book, I do recommend going and checking out his talk that he did on world building. It's basically adding things around that would make the world be lived in. You know, things like tube maps, street signs, that kind of thing. So I created an alias. This is Mew. Mew is basically the graffiti artist, is basically going around the whole city. So I created some like throw-ups of that name, some tags, stickers of little cats as well, little wheat paste posters similar to the Obey logo, which I really loved. And then after they were designs, they all look like this. This is going to come in useful later, but you see this vending machine here? That also needs to be designed. So I sketched out a few things in my notebook. I kind of wanted this vending machine to be vending fish rather than drinks. The reason why is because this whole place has been inhabited by cats. And one of the characters, Oscar, this is the old guy. This is the guy who's going to be a fisherman in this one, and I need him a reason to come down the Noodle Nog. This will become apparent when it comes to me talking about the story, but one thing that I learned is give the characters a reason for them to be there, and this is one of the reasons for a character to be there. So I had a few ideas and a few things to do with the vending machine itself, and one of the things I found out sort of about Japanese vending machines themselves is the very cutesy designs, the very like bright and bold colours, so I basically settled upon this one with the 3 fishes on. Rather than trying to draw it in the perspective of the background itself, I made it flat. This is so with the graffiti and the vending machine graphics done, I could bring it in and start skewing them and changing the perspective so it fit the walls and the vending machine itself. Basically, the last thing to do was to create a shadow over the whole background to make it look a bit more darker than what it actually is. And after all said and done, the final illustration looked something like this. Now, what do we do with this? It does look very static at the moment, and it doesn't really look lived in, there's not really much movement going on. So this is where After Effects comes in. So I brought it into After Effects just as a flat image, and I started adding all different effects on it using either plugins or some of the things I could find online. Footage Crate is great for this, or Production Crate, I don't really know what it's called, it has several different names, but it always takes you to the same website. And using tutorials online, I can't state how much people should use YouTube as a learning tool rather than just trying to figure it off the top of your head. I added things like rain, I got puddles on there with the reflection, and then I even also added little raindrops in there as well, so make it look like it's hitting the puddles. I also gave the reflection a little bit of a warp and a wobble, so it looked more sort of realistic. I also added rain, things with like the vending machine I made glow, a little bit back and forth humming. I also created this car in Affinity Designer, brought it in and made it drive past. Added motion blur so it looked like a car was driving past. I also found these birds that were on Production Crate as well, added those in, masked those off of the building. That's just some of the things you can add to backgrounds to make it look more alive, make it look more that's moving forward. And then one of the things that really brought this thing to life is I added a depth of field blur. Now this is literally just a square or a circle added on with some blur that's blurring the whole thing. This is on an adjustment layer, so you can basically change which layer it's on and it affects the entire thing, that's everything underneath it. And after all was said and done, it basically looks like this. Now this is the video of it going. I'm hoping at some point further down the line I can make it loop nicely, so you don't kind of notice it going back to the start again. I'll probably make it a bit longer as well. But this is pretty much the main menu's background. Now for the main menu itself, I've dabbled around with a few things, basically taking off inspiration of the sketches that I made right at the very start. I didn't know whether to have the logo or not. This will come a bit later further down the line, but I just need to make sure that this is kind of like a placeholder for now. And eventually made something that looked like this. This is bare bones at the moment. I'm going to be creating little hover versions of this so you can actually select things and click on things. But essentially the main concept of the main menu looks something like this. Now you might notice on the left hand side the Noodle Nook itself looks very bare. There's a reason for this. I am going to be going back during the polish phase and redoing the background. And whatever I put in this main background is going to be updated in the main menu image, so whatever I can change in the Clip Studio version, I can basically just change in the illustration and it will self-update in the main menu itself without having to do anything. It basically means I can make changes on the fly and it changes it further down the line, which is great. And that's pretty much it for now. So let's go on Miro, which is my planning software of choice, and mark it off as complete for now. And that's pretty much it. That's the main menu done. In the next episode, we're going to be starting on the character sprites and hopefully showing off a new character. So without further ado, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.